Good morning. Yes, it's morning here. The first day of fall for 2018, and we are on chapter 11 of Let the Circle Be Unbroken. So, remember last time Stacy had left home, just leaving a note, not saying where he went. He and Mo are gone somewhere. And the best we know is that they are at the cane fields, the sugar cane fields, working. But we don't know where. So, let's get on with chapter 11. Maybe he's dead, said Mary Lou Wellever. Maybe they're both dead. I laid into Mary Lou with all that I had, hitting her so ferociously that she fell whimpering upon the ground, her thin arms over her face to protect herself from my fury. Some boy and Maynard tried to pull me off. "Cassie, you gonna hurt her bad. You keep it up," hollered Maynard as I beat at her cowering form. "He ain't dead, you hear me? He ain't, so you keep your filthy mouth to yourself." "Let her go, Cassie," some boy yelled, taking hold of my arm. "Cassie!" Maynard grabbed my other arm, and together he and some boy pulled me away. Mary Lou continued to cringe on the ground, too paralyzed with fear to move. As tears slipped down my cheeks, I shrieked wildly at her, trying to get at her again, but Maynard and some boy's hold was too strong. "Cassie Logan!" I looked up just as Miss Daisy Crocker stepped from the crowd and grabbed my arm. Some boy and Maynard released me with a helpless shrug, then looked on sympathetically as Miss Crocker led me away. I hollered back at Mary Lou one last time. Miss Crocker gave me a jerk. "Now that's enough of that," she said. She led me to her empty classroom, ordered me to sit, and left. I waited for her to return, trembling with anger and fear. A fear not of Miss Crocker or anything she could do, but of Mary Lou's words. It was mid-November, and Stacy had been gone already nearly 8 weeks now. In all that time, there had been no word of him, no word from him or Mo, and inside me I was scared all the time, as the knot of fear swelled with the passing days, eating at my ebbing faith that he was all right. A few minutes later, when Miss Crocker returned, Suze Ella was with her. "Now I know that life is not easy for you now, Cassie," said Miss Crocker in her familiar brusque way. "But even when times are hard, we cannot go around taking out our frustrations on others. That's just not the Christian way. Suze Ella, now I want you to talk to her, and afterward I'll take her to see Mr. Wellever. Sorrow or not, we just cannot tolerate fighting here at Great Faith." Suze Ella agreed wholeheartedly with Miss Crocker, and then said if Miss Crocker didn't mind, she would like to talk to me alone. Miss Crocker looked somewhat askance at both of us, as if we were taking advantage of her sympathetic gesture, and agreed, "But only a few minutes. Class will be starting promptly at 1, and I want Mr. Wellever to see her before then." After she had gone, Suze Ella sat sideways at the desk in front of me, her eyes on me, but for a while saying nothing. Finally she spoke. "Well, what were you fighting for?" "Didn't she tell you?" I asked, still angry. "She said she thought it was something about Stacy. Was it?" "That devilish Mary Lou said he was dead." Suze Ella was silent a long time. Then she stood. "Come on." "Where?" "Outside. I want to go for a walk." "But Miss Crocker told you." "I'll worry about Miss Crocker." "Mr. Wellever, too?" "Him, too. Come on." She walked out, not waiting to see if I would follow. I waited several moments thinking on it and went after her. Suze Ella was headed for the trail leading into the forest. "You know, Cassie," she said when I had caught up, "I know you might not think so, but there are some ways we are alike." I stared at her. "What's that?" "What we love. We love very deeply. I understand why you jumped on Mary Lou." "Would you have?" She looked back at me and was honest. "I don't think so. Maybe I would have liked to, but I don't think I would have. It's just not me." We walked in silence until she spoke again. "I've wished a lot of times, though, I were more hot-tempered and could just say what I think." "You just be getting yourself into trouble. You just be staying near to perfect like you are, and you'll do better," I advised. Suze Ella stopped and laughed. "Near to perfect? That's what you try to be, ain't it?" "Not really. Seem that way." "Well, maybe I do, sometimes." "That's what I thought." She looked away and then back at me. "Maybe I should try being more like you," she teased. "Maybe," I said, and the two of us walked on. We came to the fallen tree where I had played my last game of marbles. It seemed so long ago. We sat down and talked, mostly about Stacy. "I swear to God, Suze Ella, he ever come back, I won't ever do anything to make him mad again. He want to go off by himself, I'll let him be. He want to keep changing, he can do that too. I won't say nothing. He want to..." "What you laughing about?" "Because you couldn't do it, Cassie." "Yes, I could." She shook her head. "It wouldn't be like you. Besides, as much as you might get on his nerves sometimes, Stacy would want you to be you." Her eyes twinkled. "He wouldn't know you otherwise." When the bell rang, we did not go back. There was no rush, Suze Ella said. "You gonna get in trouble." "You want to go back then?" "No," I decided. "Besides, I think trouble'll look good on you for a change." She laughed. "Not too good, I hope." After school, Christopher John, Little Man, and I sat with Little Willie and a group of other friends by the well waiting for Suze Ella, who was still inside, explaining to both Mr. Wellever and Miss Crocker why she had been late for her class. I had already gotten a stern lecture from Mr. Wellever for fighting with Mary Lou and had been dismissed, but they had kept Suze Ella. "Ain't heard nothing? Not a word?" questioned Little Willie, as he did practically every day, even though he knew we would have told him if we had. "I still can't get over them leaving in the first place," said Clarence. Don Shorter leaned against the well. "Wish they'd have let me in on it. I'd have gone with them." Clarence looked over at him. "Would you?" "Sure, me and Ron." "Well, when they get back," said Little Willie, "I'm going to sure get on them, not even saying nothing to me about this thing." "Humph," Ron said. "They must be having some kind of good time." Little Willie looked at him as if he was crazy. "Working the cane fields?" "No, that ain't what I meant. Meant off seeing the country, taking care of themselves." "Oh." Little Willie did not sound convinced. There was silence around the well. Then, with a shake of his head, he mumbled, "Shoot, wish they'd come on back. I miss them scoundrels." "Well, at least one thing," said Don. "What's that?" "They ain't going to be bothered with no Stewart Walker where they are." He nodded toward a car coming to the school grounds. "Look there." The black Hudson pulled in front of the well, and Stewart stepped out. He looked out over the car's hood at us, taking his time before speaking. He knew he already had our attention. "Finally," he said. "Y'all young'uns know a nigger by the name of Dubé Cross?" Dubé, who had been sitting quietly on the ground with his back against the well, looked up in surprise. Fear welled in his eyes, and he said nothing. but our eyes had automatically shifted to him when his name was mentioned, and now Stewart looked at him too. "You boy, what's your name?" "Mason." Stewart waited, saying nothing else. Dubé leaped to his feet. Dubé, Mr. Walker, sir. Dubé Cross." Stewart studied him. "Heard you was helping them Union men when they was here." Dubé trembled. He kept his eyes on the ground and did not look at Stewart. "Heard now that Morris Wheeler's been seen near this way over by Pinewood Ridge. You seen him?" Dubé glanced up, his eyes pleading with Stewart. He tried to speak, but he was so terrified by Stewart's presence that he was unable to make anything but a sputtering sound that did not turn into words. "He don't speak so good," I said, not liking to see him like this. "He can't answer you." Stewart's glance slid my way. "Well, you seem to do all right. Get plenty of mouth on you," he grinned. I didn't like the feel of it. Christopher John and little man moved in front of me, and Stewart laughed. His eyes lingered a moment longer. Then he turned his attention back to Dubé. "Well, boy, I'm waiting here." Dubé kept trying, but it was no use. He couldn't speak. Finally, in desperation, he shook his head. "You telling me the truth, boy?" Dubé nodded. Stewart stared at Dubé. Dubé stared at the ground. "You hear from him or any other of them Union men, I want to know about it. You hear me, boy?" Dubé nodded, not looking up. "That go the same for all of y'all. There ain't gonna be no Union down in here, so y'all tell that to your folks. No Union." His eyes circled the group, and he started to get into the car. Then he saw Suze Ella. She was coming out of her class building with Miss Crocker and Mr. Wellever. All three were smiling. Stewart waited for her to leave them and head our way, and when she finally saw him, he smiled icily, tipped his hat, and then left. Suze Ella stared after him, then hurried over. "What did he want?" she asked. "Nothing about you," I said, and turned quickly to Dubé, who had fallen to his knees, trembling with his fear. "Dubé, you all right?" Dubé took several deep breaths and nodded. "Man, you seen them Union fellas?" asked little Willie. Dubé shook his head, and after one more deep breath said, But I do. I ain't telling him nothing. Not one devilish thing." At supper, Papa mentioned that hiring had begun again at the hospital. "Maybe I'll go over there and see if I can get on," he said, trying to bring conversation back to our daily meals. "It's a little late for that, don't you think? When you should have been working here, you weren't." "Mary, don't start in on me now. It's just the truth." Papa ate his food in silence, and before he was finished, left the table. Mr. Morrison went after him. "You can't keep blaming him, Mary," Big Ma chided when they both were gone. "You know he's blaming himself. This thing, it's eating him up inside." "It's eating me up inside, too," Mama said, and began to clear the table. My eyes met Christopher John's and little man's, confirming what we all felt. Nothing was the same anymore. Since Stacy had left, there was no more laughter in the house, and the warmth between Mama and Papa, which we had always taken for granted, seemed to have gone with Stacy. Breakfast and supper passed with little talk. Evenings were strained, and although both Mama and Papa attempted to soothe our fears and keep life without Stacy as normal as possible, the tension between them bothered us almost as much as Stacy's absence. After supper, little man and Christopher John went off to find Papa. I started the dishes. "Mama," I said as she scraped the leftovers from our plate into one dish for the hogs, "don't you love him any more?" Mama stopped and stared at me, a frown lining her brow. "What?" "Papa, don't you love him any more?" yours? What makes you ask a thing like that?" "The way you are with him, Mama. It ain't Papa's fault 'bout Stacy. It's Stacy's own doing." Mama turned away again and began to scrape. "Mama, you can't blame him." "Cassie, what's between your papa and me is something we'll have to work out, and it's something I don't wish to discuss with you. But, Mama—" "Just wash the dishes, Cassie," she said and laughed. Christopher John and Little Man returned a few minutes later. "Papa, he said for us to come on back," Little Man exclaimed. "He with Mr. Morrison in the cabin." Through the evening we kept waiting for Papa and Mr. Morrison to return to the house. As our bedtime neared and passed and they did not come back, Mama ordered us to bed. We protested, but Mama was firm and would not even let us go across the garden to say good night. Once I was in bed, I tried to stay awake, listening for Papa, but I fell asleep without hearing him come in. "Hey, son boy, you seen Wardell?" I hollered as I dashed off Miss Leanne's front porch after a Saturday morning reading session. Son boy sat on his own porch with his legs astraddle the rail and his head forward resting on a post. Without looking up, he shrugged. I went over. "What's the matter with you?" This time son boy pulled back from the post and looked at me. "Feel a bit sick on the stomach, that's all." "I'm sorry. You tell your mama?" Son boy frowned. "And have her give me some of that old bad-tasting castor oil of hers and put me to bed?" "No, thank you, ma'am." I shrugged. "All right, then. What you say about Wardell?" "I ain't seen him, Cassie. Most likely he in the woods somewheres," he said, putting his head back to the post. I patted his shoulder sympathetically. "I hope you feel better. You sure don't want to tell your mama?" Son boy shook his head. "Well then, I'll see you later," I said, headed down the path leading to the stream, and saw Little Man and Christopher John running wildly about on the bank in a game of chase with Don Lee. As I reached them, Miss Ellis called down the trail, summoning Don Lee. "Oh, shoot," he said. "Y'all wait. I'll be back in a minute." We waited several minutes, but when Don Lee did not return, we started toward home. Christopher John and Little Man said that they had seen Wardell earlier walking south along the Little Rosalie, so we walked that way as well, hoping to see him. Since Stacy had gone, we had spent a great deal of time with Wardell. Often as we walked to or from school, he would suddenly emerge from the forest and with a wave of his arm beckon us to follow him. Leaving the road, we would do just that, letting him lead us along the hidden forest paths. The forest was Wardell's home, and he knew it well. Without a word, he would point out to us the tracks of the forest animals. Sometimes he even led us directly to some occupied animal's lair, where he would sit on his haunches, gazing at the animals until they left, or we reminded him that we had to get on to school or to go home. At first, a few days ago, he had taken us to an old pine tree where a bird sat grounded on a lower branch, its broken wing tied securely to a stick. Gently, Wardell had lifted it from its perch and showed it to us. The bird had acknowledged us with a cheerful chirp, and Wardell set him back again. Following the flow of the Little Rosalie, we headed for the same tree, and, as we had guessed, found Wardell there. "Hey, Wardell," we called. He didn't answer. Then we saw the dead cat at his feet, then the dead bird in his hands. "What happened?" His eyes on the bird, Wardell said simply, "That there cat killed the bird. I done killed it." Then he laid the bird at the foot of the tree and began clawing at the hard ground, scooping out a grave. He put the bird in the hole, covered it up with dirt and leaves, and without another word to us, walked off. "How could he do it?" questioned Christopher John, staring down at the cat. "Just kill it like that." Little Man stooped to inspect the cat more closely. Neck's broke, he observed. Christopher John shook his head. Just don't understand how he could do it. I didn't say anything, but I thought I did. I remembered what Miss Leanne had once said, that when Wardell loves anything, he wouldn't let anyone or anything hurt it if he could help it. Christopher John insisted that we bury the cat as well, and once we had, we waited a while at the tree, hoping Wardell would return. Finally, realizing he would not, we continued on to the road and headed for home. As we neared the house, we saw Mr. Jameson's car in the driveway and began to run, hoping that Mr. Jameson had brought some news of Stacy. Twice Mr. Jameson had been to the house since Stacy had gone. With him, Mama, Papa, Big Ma, and Mr. Morrison had drawn up a list of likely areas for which men and boys were recruited to work the cane fields. The list was a long one, and Mama had spent most of her time since writing letters to each town sheriff in the designated areas, asking for any information they might have about Stacy and Mo. Mr. Jameson had provided the stationery, his own letterhead, and the letters had been written in his name as well. The reason was a practical one. A sheriff would pay more attention to a business letter from an attorney at law than to a letter from a black family pleading for news of their child. But so far the letters had brought no news of Stacy. Mr. Jameson here was just telling us about a place he just hit about, down in the bayou country. They had trucks up in here recruiting for the cane fields, Papa told us when we arrived. He paused. I figured to go down and see. And then you be bringing Stacy on back? Asked Little Man hopefully. Well, son, don't get your hopes up, but if he's down there, I'll be bringing him home. How long you gonna be gone, Papa? Christopher John wanted to know. Week, maybe 2, depending. I'm gonna have to trace the route of that truck and see where it all stopped. That could take some time. Big Ma shook her head mournfully. I just can't believe that child ain't wrote. Maybe he just can't, Miss Caroline, said Mr. Jameson. The cane fields aren't known for making things easy on a person. Most likely he just hasn't been able to get a letter out yet. I was just praying to the Lord, that's all it is. Mr. Morrison turned to Papa. When you planning on leaving? Papa looked Mama's way. Her eyes didn't meet his. Soon as I can, right after I get some things together. Well, I sure wish you well, David, Mr. Jameson said. I think you know that. I do. We all do. While Papa packed with Christopher John and Little Man helping him, Big Ma, Suze Ella, and I fixed some food for him to take. Mama, however, left the house and walked across the pasture. When she returned, Papa was on the back porch taking down his shaving mirror. He waited for her as she crossed the yard. I watched them both from the kitchen window. You all right? He said as she stopped at the steps. She nodded. He waited as if expecting Mama to say something, and when she didn't, turned and started down the porch. David, Papa stopped and looked back at her. Do you know what Cassie asked me the other day? She didn't wait for him to answer. She asked me if I still loved you. There was a moment when neither spoke. Finally, Papa said, What did you tell her? Don't you know? Papa answered with a dry smile. Well, it's hard to tell these days. Mama stepped onto the porch, hesitated only a moment, and then went into his arms. David, she said as he held her to him, just bring Stacy back. Please, honey, bring him back. It was hot in the kitchen, miserably so. All Saturday, huge kettles, 2 filled with sliced apples brought from the orchard, 2 others with hulls and cores for jelly, had been cooking on the stove as Big Ma went about her annual canning. I sat at the kitchen table with Mama, Big Ma, and Suze Ella, peeling more apples, but the heat coming from the stove was getting so intense that my stomach churned with nausea and my head ached. I looked down at the bushels of apples, pears, and peaches still waiting to be pared and felt suddenly tired. Getting up, I went over to the water bucket and, finding it empty, checked the bucket hanging from the porch rafter. But there was no water there either. I thought of going to the well to get some more, but right now, as tired as I was, it seemed too much to tackle. Grumbling, I returned to the table and sat down again. "Now, just what's the matter with you?" Big Ma demanded. "I don't see how come we sitting around here peeling apples and pears and peaches and such and making preserves and jelly like everything's all right and Stacy ain't gone nowheres." "You don't?" Mama said without looking at me as she continued to pare. "Cassie, life go on no matter what. If we don't keep on doing the everyday kind of things, it means we've given up. That's what you want? To give up and not believe that Stacy's coming back?" It was one of those questions Mama had a habit of asking that made me think and feel guilty at the same time. I picked up my pan again without answering. "Sure is hot in here." This time Mama looked at me. "It's not that hot." "Well, it sure is hot to me." Mama reached over and, taking my head between her hands, turned my face to hers. Her touch felt cool and soothing. She frowned. "Cassie, how long you been feeling hot like this?" "All afternoon." "Anything hurt you?" "Just this heat got me feeling sick on the stomach and my throat sore." With her hand still on my face, Mama called to Big Ma, who had gone back to the stove. "Feel this child's face." Big Ma's rough hands took the place of Mama's. They too felt cool. "She said she's been feeling like this all afternoon, nauseous, and she has a sore throat." At that, Big Ma frowned and straightened. "Well, we better get her to bed." Under normal circumstances, I would have vigorously protested being put to bed, but at this particular moment, bed seemed a very good place to be. Mama and Big Ma worried about me through the long afternoon, and late that night, when a red rash appeared on my neck, they looked frightened. I heard them say it was scarlet fever. I didn't know what scarlet fever was, and I was too weak to ask. I just knew by their whispered, anxious tones that it was something to be feared. Before the dawn, Mr. Morrison wrapped me in a blanket and carried me to his cabin. He said that he and Big Ma would take care of me there so that Christopher John, Little Man, Suze Ella, and Mama would not get the fever. I nodded, trying to understand. After that, everything was hazy. Once I opened my eyes and found Christopher John and Little Man staring down at me from the window, and Little Man cried, "Cassie, don't you die, you hear? Don't you die." "She ain't," Christopher John assured him, his voice cracking strangely. Then I felt Big Ma hovering over me. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them again, it was dark, and Little Man and Christopher John were gone. Day faded into night and darkness into dreams, and I couldn't separate them from each other. I drifted in and out of sleep, in and out of dreams that were real and terrifying. Stacy was in them, 1 minute alive, the next cold and dead in the cane fields. Each time I saw him lying there, I ran away, fleeing the sight of him, and then he would come alive again, running and playing with Christopher John, Little Man, and me. Lazily he laid on the bank of the pond with us, staring up at the trees, ran games of chase with us on Lady and Jack across the pasture, and walked beside us on the red road to school. I would feel relief then, but only for a little while, for the dreams kept repeating themselves. No matter how hard I struggled to keep Stacy alive, always, just before I awoke, he was lying in the cane fields, unmoving and cold once more. Somewhere I thought I heard someone say, Don Lee was dead. I thought I heard that, but I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. Maybe Stacy was really home after all. Maybe the whole business about his going was just a dream, and when I finally awakened, he would be there by the bed waiting, grinning down at me. Maybe that was the way it would be. When the fever broke, Big Ma told me I had been sick for almost a week and that Papa had come home. I asked about Stacy. There was no news of him. "Oh, Cassie, we sure was scared," said Little Man as he sat on the edge of the bed. Christopher John sat on the other side, and Suze Ella stood at the foot, leaning against the bedpost. I was finally back in my own bed again, and this was the first day I had felt well enough to sit up. "Sure was," agreed Christopher John, "especially after old Don Lee died." Tears welled in his eyes as his voice trailed off. Turning toward the window, he wiped the tears away. "Y'all went to the funeral?" "Just Mama and Mr. Morrison," Little Man replied. "Too many folks carrying the fever, and Mama ain't wanted us round it. They buried him the day Papa come." He waited a moment, then added in a small voice, "Other folks, they died too." I had heard enough to know that the fever had swept the entire area, attacking both black and white. I looked up. "Who?" Both Christopher John and Little Man looked away. Suze Ella took my hand. "The Well-Evers' baby boy. Also a little girl from near Smellings Creek. It's been so sad, Cassie." I nodded, wondering why I felt no loss about Don Lee or any of them. "How's Sunboy?" "He's feeling better," said Suze Ella, "but he's still weak like you, and they say he's taken Don Lee's death pretty hard." Again I nodded, feeling numb. "Wonder what it's like," said Little Man. "What's that?" I asked. "Death." "Oh." "Just lying there still all the time." He got down on the deerskin rug and lay down. With his hands at his sides, he stiffened, closed his eyes, and just lay there. Christopher John studied him. "How you feel?" Little Man didn't answer right away, but finally, when he chose to arise from the dead, he opened his eyes and hopped up. "Must be awful," he concluded, "not being able to move. Get stiff." "Boy," I said, "when you're dead, it don't much matter. You can't feel anything anyway." Little Man was thoughtful. "I suppose the worms get at you." He looked over at the rest of us, as if hoping we would deny this. When none of us did, he said, "Don't think I'd like that. Worms running all through my body." "What you care?" questioned Christopher John. "You be gone." "No, I wouldn't. I'd be in the box." Christopher John shook his head. "I asked Mom about it, and she said when you die, that part that's you just ups and leaves the body part. She says it's like when a butterfly leaves its caterpillar skin. Just ups and flies away. Says it be free then." He thought on it and decided, "It ain't so bad." Little Man thought on it too, but did not change his mind. "Yes, it is too. I like my body just the way it is, and I don't much care for worms to be running all through it. I'm in it or not." Then his eyes took on a faraway look, and his words were softer. "Guess they told you Pop ain't found Stacy." "Yeah, they did." Suze Ella shook her head. "I don't understand it." "Oh. Hang on." Christopher John took it upon himself to change the subject. "One moment, please." Uh-oh. Have to plug in. Okay. Christopher John took it upon himself to change the subject. You know, Cassie, there ain't been no school this past week and last. Ain't? They say they was trying to keep the sickness from spreading, and I had to go be one of the sick, I complained, upset at the thought of missing the unexpected vacation. Say, Cassie, how you like them flowers? I followed Christopher John's glance to the vase filled with late-blooming asters. Cut 'em myself. Thought I'd bring a little of the outdoors inside for you. You did, I said, thinking how nice it was to have them around me again. They're real nice. Yeah, and when they don't look good no more, I'll bring you some more, and... He broke off abruptly and cocked his head, then jumping off the bed ran to the window. There he is again. Who? Wardell. He been coming every day since he been down sick. Just come and sit by the road and play that harmonica of his. He has? I said in total surprise. I pushed the covers back. I want to see. Girl, you better stay where you are, little man advised. Big Ma, she say you can't be getting up yet. Suze Ella readjusted the covers around me. That's right, Cassie. You've got to get your strength back. Still feeling weak, I complied. He ever say anything? Just play, said Christopher John. Little man jumped from the bed. I'm going to go ask him to come in. He won't, I told him. Well, we can ask him anyways, Christopher John insisted. We do every day. Big Ma say that just manners. Big Ma say that just manners. With a bit of explanation, he and little man dashed out the front door. Suze Ella shook her head. I don't understand it. I mean, why he just comes and plays. I smiled knowingly. Don't worry about it. Not understanding him, I mean. Ain't too many people that do. When Christopher John and little man returned, I said, well, wouldn't come, said little man. I nodded, disappointed, even though I had known he wouldn't. Big Ma came in, waving her hands in the air. All right now, I'm going to have to shoo y'all youngins out of here so Cassie can get some rest. She most likely getting tired about now. No, man, Big Ma, I ain't. Yes, you is. Now, all y'all just go on now. You can visit with her again this afternoon sometime. After Suze Ella and the boys left, I fell off to sleep. When I awoke, Papa was sitting in the rocker next to the bed reading the Bible. As I turned, he looked up and smiled. Well, you looking better each time I see you, sugar. How you feel? I smiled back. I feel fine, Papa. Back to business, I don't see how come I gotta stay in bed all the time. You just ain't well enough to go getting up quite yet. You do like Big Ma says, and you'll be fine in just little of no time. Yes, sir, Papa. Yes, baby. Papa, what we gonna do? There's all them bills to pay and the taxes, and you having to leave the railroad to go look for Stacy. Well, Papa, what we gonna do? You said one time we'd never lose the land, and we won't. Yes, sir, I said, still worried. What is it, sugar? Suze Ella said Mama sent a whole lot of telegrams to places so to be sure to reach you about me. That cost quite a little bit of money, didn't it? Right nice sum, all right. I'm sorry about that, Papa. That money, I know we needed it for a whole lot of things more important than telegrams. Papa leaned back in his chair and smiled. You know, Cassie, while you was sleeping so peaceful there, I was thinking about when you was born. You was? He nodded. I was 24 years old then, and was working down at that old sawmill near Smellings Creek. It was run by an old cracker by the name of Joe Morgan, and some of the colored folks that worked for him had a really hard time with him. But for some reason or other, he hadn't never bothered me. I suppose that's 'cause I didn't never have nothing to do with him or say to him outside of what I had to do with the business of that sawmill. while some others would drink with him and so forth, and I ain't never approved of that, getting too familiar with these crackers. Anyways, on that particular day, the day you was born, old Joe Morgan had drunk more than he should have for lunch, and he called me from my work and asked me about drinking with him. I told him no, thank you, and went on back to work. Well, I suppose that really made him angry, me not drinking with him, after he'd invited me and all. And he stayed up there in that office of his a good part of the afternoon. And from the look of him when he come out, he'd been stewing and drinking most of that time. He come down to the mill where I was and began talking loud and saying things like I wasn't half doing my work and that I was sneaking off for quitting time and such. Well, I knew he was drunk, and I didn't say nothing to him. Just kept on working. But that just made him madder, and he said I better answer him when he talked to me. I told him I didn't know I was supposed to answer him, and Lord, if he wasn't mad already, he sure was mad then. He said I was just too uppity for my own good, and he better just chop me down to size. Then he come, grabbing an axe. And he was going to use it on you? I asked breathlessly. Papa smiled slyly. I believe that was what he was planning on doing. Papa, what'd you do? Nothing. Just stood there and told him he planned on using that thing on me. He better plan on killing me. That's all. That's all. And what'd he do? He stood there a moment all red in the face, then turned and went back to his office. And what'd you do? I got my stuff and came on home without my pay, not knowing what that old white man was going to try and do to me once he got sober. But guess what, sir? When I got home, I forgot all about Joe Morgan. You did? Papa nodded. How come? 'Cause you was here, born that same afternoon. I smiled. There you was, the prettiest, baldest baby I'd ever seen in my life. I laughed. And I said to myself, what I gotta worry about these white folks for? Or a job? Or money I ain't got? This little girl right here, she's what's important. Ain't never gonna be nothing more important than this little girl. I felt a lump growing in my throat. Papa, I said, I love you. Papa smiled and took my hand, enveloping it in his own. I love you too, Cassie girl. I love you too. Finally, on the day Papa was to return to his search, I was given permission not only to get out of bed for a few hours, but to put on my pants and shirt. I felt a little wobbly at first, but as soon as I was dressed, I hurried out the front door and down the softness of the lawn to the road where Wardell had already taken up his morning vigil. When he saw me coming, he took the harmonica from his lips and smiled. I grinned back and sat beside him. The question was on his face, so I answered it. I'm fine. To my surprise, he said, I'm glad. I really like your music. Thank you for coming and playing it for me every day. It was so pretty. Wardell looked down at his harmonica. It sure helped a lot, that music. That business of staying in bed all day ain't no fun at all when you got to do it day in and day out. And being hot all the time and coughing and feeling sore, that wasn't no fun either. I ain't never really been sick before, but I tell you one thing, I ain't never wanting to be sick again. I guess I was sort of lucky, though, 'cause my fever was so high and I don't remember most of it except... I stopped. The dreams had lingered with me like a ghostly foreboding about which I had been unable to speak. I could feel Wardell's eyes on me, but I didn't turn to look at him. Except the dreams. I remember the dreams. They were so real. And Stacy, he was in them, and sometimes he was dead. Frightened by my own words, I turned frantically to Wardell. What that mean, Wardell? Me dreaming something like that? That ain't no vision, is it? It can't be no vision. I couldn't stand it if Stacy was dead. Couldn't stand it if any of 'em was dead. Cassie, Big Ma summoned from the house. Anything happened to him, I'd die my own self. I wouldn't want to live. They wasn't here. Cassie, where you at, girl? Wardell stood up. Frightened, I searched his face, looking for comfort. He looked down at me, and the gentleness in his eyes reminded me of Papa, and placed a hand on my shoulder. Everybody got to die, Cassie. But Stacy, and he died, you live. 'Cause that's how come the sun shines. Gently he pressed my shoulder, then, turning, put the harmonica to his lips and walked down the road, the music trailing him. He did not come to play for me again. And that is the end of chapter 11. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and grant you his peace.